Episode would not be complete without drawing a little blood. Not too bad. Gouged the thumb a bit, biffed it, climbing through all of these sticks. It's like climbing through a giant pile of pickup sticks. Some are round and they roll. Ask me how I know. Last week we ended up filming and storms rolled in, and as luck would have it, this week we're filming for Lesson 3 in the Sermon on the Mount series, and the storms, they are a brewing. You can hear thunder and lightning cracking in the mountains behind us, and so we're going to cross our fingers and hopefully we get this episode filmed without getting completely soaked. Who knows how this is going to go? Let's dive in. This week, we're taking a look at lesson number 3 from Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, and it's all about anger. And what's interesting when we think about anger is I think we almost always imagine the loud, red-in-the-face person, a road rage person, or a ticked-off teenager, or somebody that's ready to fight. We tend to imagine anger as pretty one-dimensional. And the thing is, that can actually create a problem for us. And the reason is it can set you up to allow other kinds of anger to take root and go unchecked in your hearts. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, isn't anger just anger? I mean, what's the deal? There's actually different kinds of anger? We'll get into that. Well, I wanted to give you a visual to help you get a better understanding of some of the different kinds of anger. And today we've worked our way back into the wilderness in kind of central northern Alberta and found this huge burned out area here next to the Saskatchewan River. A couple of months ago, we weren't sure if we would be able to travel up here because of all of the wildfire activity. Thankfully, there's been a lot of rain. As you can see, we're getting more of it right now here coming in behind us. And a lot of the fires that were up here are under control around us, but you can still see a lot of the remnants of this scorched landscape. This area we're in here was probably burned out many years ago and is now starting to regrow. You see, anger is a lot like fire. There's different kinds of fire, but all of them can hurt you, or worse yet, hurt the people around you. The obvious fires are the big blazing fires that you can see from miles away. You know that they're raging and anything in their path is definitely in trouble. It's getting burned up, right? But there's also those kind of fires that just lay there smoldering, almost dormant for days, just clinging on, waiting for the conditions to be right to reignite and let loose. When I was a kid, probably in about 4th or 5th grade, I got the bright idea to grab a couple of my buddies and go for a little camping cookout. The problem was we decided to go down on this hillside beneath our house. And the hill was thick with pine trees and cedar trees, and the floor of the forest was covered in years of fallen pine needles and branches. And it was something that I knew about because I planned ahead as a young 4th or 5th grader. So I grabbed my little sister's red Flyer metal wagon, right? And then I grabbed a bunch of stuff out of the kitchen and grabbed my buddies, and we headed down in the woods to make, of all things, campfire popcorn. I have no idea what we were thinking, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. Of course, we could have made it in the house on the stove. And mind you, this was long before the days of microwave popcorn was even invented. But making it on the stove seemed really boring. There's no adventure in it, right? So we packed up the red wagon and all the gear, and down the hill we went into the forest. And we set up the wagon thinking this is going to be our fire pit. We got like a metal fire pan. So we thought we were being really smart. We light a little fire inside the red wagon and stack some more wood on and then put the pan on. And I had seen my mom do this. You put vegetable oil in and then you dump the popcorn in, and then we waited and we waited. And we waited. And by this time, all we could really smell was stuff burning. There was a few pops here and there. And then we realized, okay, we probably didn't put in enough oil. So we dumped it all out and tried again. And after a few failed attempts, all we really did was make a bunch of disgusting burned popcorn and one really nasty black charred pan. Ruined for sure. So we were done with the whole miserable experiment. It just was not working. So again, thinking we were being smart, we let the fire burn down in the wagon, and then we tipped the wagon over and stomped out all the leftover coals and embers and smashed everything, and for sure thought we had put everything out. So we walked away feeling confident that everything was great, that we were really responsible, good little Boy Scouts. Unbeknownst to me, the fire was not fully out. Instead, all we did was stomp a few small coals down into the tinderbox of dried pine needles and branches, and then we just walked away and left them there to cook. It was not until about 3 or 4 days later that a neighbor kid was riding his bike down on the road below our house, and he looked up, and thankfully he happened to go by, and he saw the whole hillside going up in flames. He ran to a house, called 911, and the whole fire department pulled out in full force, surrounding our whole entire house and yard and fire trucks to try and hurry and douse this fire. Woo, here comes the storm. And so they did everything they could, and they finally got the fire put out, but it took well into the evening. And it was about that time in the evening when the fire chief called me to come over in front of my mom, and he comes walking in with a metal container and some vegetable oil thing that had been melted and asked us if we knew anything about this stuff. Well, that was back in the good old days when you got a whooping for doing dumb stuff like that. And let me tell you right now, I got a good whooping right there on the spot in front of the fire chief. It was deeply embarrassing, not to mention a bit painful, and probably pretty deserved. And when it was all said and done, the fire chief looked at me and said, "Listen here, you've got an appointment with me down at the fire department after school for the rest of the school year to come and clean the fire station." Needless to say, I don't make a lot of fires and leave them unattended anymore. There's also those kind of fires that spark up really quick, but if you deal with them right away, they're actually pretty easy to put out. They might startle you and freak you out for just a second, like a quick kitchen fire, but if you jump on it right away, you sort of walk away with a sigh of relief. So we have these three kinds of fires. The one that's big and hot, and it's obviously going to be a problem. The next kind of fire is that dangerous smoldering fire that's laying there under the surface. And then lastly is the quick flare-up. I want you to keep these three kinds of fires in mind when you hear what Jesus has to say about anger. Here's what he says. It's in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26. It goes like this. "You have heard that our ancestors were told, 'You must not commit murder.' If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say, if you are even angry with someone, you're subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you're in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you're in danger of the fires of hell. So, if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice to God. When you're on your way to court with your adversary, settle your differences quickly. Otherwise, your accuser may hand you over to the judge, who will hand you over to an officer, and you'll be thrown into prison. And if that happens, you surely won't be free again until you have paid the last penny." So Jesus clearly is talking about some practices here that are normal in his time and culture, but not really relevant to us today. I hope none of you are still offering blood sacrifices on an altar. So let's take a look at how this teaching might sound for us in our world today. Clearly, Jesus is pointing out that anger is a big deal, but not just any anger. It's not like he's saying it's never okay to be angry. What he is saying, though, is it's not okay to harbor anger or hate in your heart towards somebody else. He's highlighting the fact that it's not okay that people are going around ticked off at other people, even hating them or calling them derogatory names. But then those very same people go, well, it's not like I murdered them, so what's the problem? Jesus is taking things up a notch. He's saying flat out that everybody knows it's not okay to murder. He's here to say the problem starts long before the actual act of murder. And that brewing anger and that name calling and all of that cursing, all of it, it has to stop. And then he goes on to give a couple of examples to help people think through the different ways that anger might show up and what to do about it. First, he points out that if your anger is bursting out of you with name calling and cursing, that you better watch out. Your anger is like a raging wildfire, and you may not know it, but it's going to cause a lot of damage to people around you, and there's going to be serious consequences for you as well. You want to be a disciple? You want to follow Jesus? He's telling you right here that if you have an anger problem, then you actually probably are dealing with a heaven or hell problem. And if this sounds like you, consider this your fire alarm going off. It's time to urgently extinguish your anger and check your heart. Next, he talks about the way that anger can show up when you're going to offer a sacrifice, which is not something that we do in modern days. But here's a current version of this same type of example. Maybe you're at church and about to worship and about to pay your tithe, maybe. Maybe you're not at church. You're just out there on your way, set out to do something good. But in these times where you're trying to turn your heart toward God and serve Him, you catch a whiff of something burning. You know that smell. You might not be able to see it right away, but you know it when you smell it. That's the way God works. He deeply cares about your heart. He doesn't want you to try to be over here trying to do all of the right things and do good things when you still have a fire smoldering on the hillside behind your house from some other argument or problem that you stuffed and you just keep trying to ignore. It's like he's saying, listen, when there's that smell of smoke, that's your cue. Stop trying to do the right things. Stop caring about what you look like at church and go deal with that anger that's burning somewhere in your life. Then, once that's extinguished, great, get back to doing the right things. Lastly, Jesus talked about when you're on your way to court with your adversary to settle your differences, do it quickly. Well, let's be honest, not too many of us are on our way to court with our adversaries at any given day. This idea is this: when you find yourself in a situation that seems to be flaring up quickly, you'd better be aware and you'd better do what you can to put that fire out right away before things go too far and it turns into all kinds of trouble for you and who knows who else. Because if you get involved in a little flare up and you keep pouring gas on the situation, you're liable to end up with serious consequences. You can either bring water to those flare-ups or gas. It's your choice. I think everybody can think of situations that they've been in where things seem to get really angry really quick. Maybe it was something that you were a part of. Maybe it was something that you watched. Maybe it was your mom or dad or seeing your parents growing up that they were just getting along fine, and then a couple of jabbing comments or a sarcastic response, and all of a sudden they're screaming and ready to hit each other. Maybe it's a situation in a restaurant where you're just seeing somebody enjoy their dinner and a drunk person stumbles by and spills something on them, and bam, fire is lit and tempers are hot. What Jesus wants to teach you with all of these examples is how you handle your anger matters. And if you want to be one of His followers, it's not enough to just sit back and think to yourself, well, it's not like I'm going to murder anyone. You see, to be a real disciple of Jesus, not murdering people is not enough. That won't change the world. That won't get people's attention. That won't show people how radically different and better His Father's ways are. But learning to extinguish your anger, stopping when you smell smoke and dealing with those smoldering issues, learning to be quick to pour water on those angry flare-ups. If you'll do these things, now we're talking. this is what it looks like to follow Jesus. If you're somebody out there about to get burned by somebody's anger, and instead of getting burned, you get an apology or a kind word, or they see you walk away and come back calm, asking for forgiveness, man, there is not a person out there that wouldn't rather have that kind of response than the angry flare up. You see, doing things Jesus' way isn't only about what's good for you, it's always about what's good for you and God and others. Well, I hope this is helpful to you, and I hope that it really sinks in and takes root in your heart, and that as you begin to experience anger, which we all do in the days and weeks to come, that you'll remember this lesson. It's not a lesson from me, it's a lesson from Jesus. I just tried to put it in modern terms and give you some charred wood to help you remember the kinds of anger that might flare up. And I hope that as you see a fire burning or you smell smoke in the days ahead, you'll remember this lesson. It'll change the way you actually live out your life in for the good, in a way that is being obedient to Jesus's teaching. That, after all, is what being a disciple is all about. All right, we've got some amazing stuff in store for you. We've been able to get out the last couple of days and see some awesome waterfalls, and we've got some big hikes ahead of us. We're gonna take you to a canyon that's super deep and steep with waterfalls in it. We're gonna throw the drone up and get in there and find out if I can make my way through the canyon or leave drone number 3 in the water. You'll have to just stick around. Please don't leave drone number 3 in the water. Please. My wife will kill me.